Katey, and we are getting on in the year. It is kind of coming towards the close. I mean, we're not quite there, we're not end of year yet, but it definitely does start to feel like we're edging towards there. So in this video, I wanted to talk to you about some of the decks that I'm kind of really setting the intention that I want to work with before this year is out. So these are my before 2019 decks, the decks that I want to start working with, start to get to know or get to know better in this kind of closing period of 2018. So the first I will mention is the Urban Tarot. This is a deck that I got fairly recently in a trade, and I've spoken a little bit about it in my changing taste tarot video that I did, and I'll leave a link to, that I very kind of in the last year or so I've been very drawn to more contemporary decks, and one that was really quite a surprise to me was and is the Urban Tarot. Now this one I haven't gotten into yet. I've been very busy. But I definitely feel like this is one that I need to spend some time with. I don't think this is just going to be like a pull it out, whip it out and just start reading with it. I feel like this is one that I want to get to know quite well. I have also bought the book, so I really want to dive into that because there is a whole story behind this deck, and that really is a large part of what appeals to me about it. But it's also that thing that kind of gets in the way of just jumping in because there's a little bit of more time, a bit more of a time commitment investment required, but it's absolutely beautiful, and I'm so curious about what it's going to be like working with a deck like this because it's so far out of anything I've ever used before. But it's absolutely beautiful, and it's definitely one that I've been wanting to work with, and I just kind of haven't set that time aside just yet. I mean, I've only had it for, I don't think I've even had it for a month yet as of filming this video, so it's still very new to me, but I really want to make sure that I'm using it soon, because I know that it's very easy to kind of just sit a deck away and be like, oh yeah, I'll get to you soon, and then before you know it, it's been a year and you haven't touched it. I don't want that to happen to this deck, so I still have it out on my desk, and I am setting the intention that I really want to get working with this deck soon. The next deck on this list is the Idiosyncradeck or Idiosyncradeck. And this was sent to me by the fabulous Tracy, and I did do an unboxing of this one. Again, this is kind of like the new modern streak that I've been on lately. I mean, it's still quite cartoony, and you know, it's not, it doesn't look like the real world, I suppose, but there is an element of it being set in the real world, I suppose. It's super colourful and super pretty, and I fell in love with this deck as soon as I opened up the box. I've just been focusing on the Ophidia Rosa the last couple of weeks, which has been really fun and really exciting, developing a relationship with that deck, which again, a lot of these decks that I'm working with are really out of my comfort zone, which is exciting. But this is definitely one that I'm just really genuinely excited to get into. And unlike the Urban Tarot, I do think this one will be one that I can just jump into. I just haven't done that yet because I've been working with the Ophidia Rosa. But it's so cool, so fun, and so unlike anything I've worked with before. Well, I mean, I guess it's not as out of the box as like the Urban Tarot is, but it still is quite different for me. But I love these colors. I love the playfulness of the images. I love how simple they are and yet still how effective they are. And I think the court cards are really quite illustrative of that. There's a lot going on in here without there being, it's kind of one of those, you know, make it as simple as you can, but not any more simple than that. There's like a much nicer way of saying that, but that's basically how it feels with this deck, and I love it. I'm so excited. I also have the Amethyst Oracle coming in a trade, so that will be going along with the Idiosyncradeck, and I want to kind of see how I go with both of those, working with them separately, as well as the I got the what are they called, like the little dice, the divination dice set from Cracked Amethyst as well. So I have like kind of the whole divination set from that creator. So I kind of want to work with all of that and see how I go. The Naked Heart is a deck that I was sent for review, and I have done a couple of small readings with this, but it's definitely a deck I want to focus on more as we close out the year, because I do want to do a really thorough review on it before the year ends. That's my goal. And so I feel like this is definitely like I need to work with this deck. So this is another one that's been sitting out on my desk, which is kind of, you know, I have my shelf over here, and then I always have like kind of a, you know, a small pile of decks that I'm working with or I want to be working with. So this one stayed on my desk. But I feel like to do a review, and my reviews especially, I try to be really thorough and detailed, like specific as well. And in order to do that, I need to work with a deck a lot, quite a lot, in order to establish that opinion and be able to express it. I need to work with it a lot. And so this deck, I need to work with some more, quite a bit more. So this is definitely up the top of that list, because I do really want to get that review out to you. Some decks, you know, I work with for a year or more before I do a review. And sometimes I just feel like that's necessary, but I don't think it will be with this one. And also I just know that a lot of people are really curious about it. We've had a lot of unboxings, which is awesome and super fun, but I feel like a review can or should offer something different. And so I do want to hopefully get that out to you guys who are curious and not quite sure whether this is a deck for you or whether you want to invest in it. Because, you know, indie decks are a bit of an investment, and that's great. We get to invest in our creators. But it's not a choice everybody wants to make lightly. So this is a deck that is a bit different to me, but for me, but in a different way. This is just maybe not a deck that I wasn't sure if it was going to be for me. It's just kind of like that borderline of it's pretty and I'm interested, I'm curious, but it doesn't immediately jump out at me as a deck that I know I'm going to love. And I have spoken about before how I don't always love animal decks. And this deck definitely falls into that category, but I feel like it's in a bit of a different way. Like these animals are doing things. It's not just an animal stuck on the front and you're supposed to know what it means. Perhaps there are some cards like that, but that's part of, you know, what I need to work out for myself. Whether I can get on board with these animals and start to, you know, hear what they have to tell me. So I'm really curious to see how my relationship with this deck develops, because it is that kind of borderline of I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I'm going to get on with this deck. It is beautiful, there's no denying that, but I'm not sure how I'm going to find it personally. So definitely interested to see and curious to see how my relationship develops, and hopefully I'll get a review out to you soon. Next we have a bit of a set, and that is the Ophidia Rosa, which I have been working with a little bit so far, and the companion oracle deck is at the Pythia Botanica. The tarot deck I bought on a bit of a whim out of curiosity, because so many of these decks are just really quite different for me, which is exciting. But so far I've had some really great experiences with this, but it's still, I think because it's so different, it still feels very new. I still feel like I have a lot more to learn. There's a lot more room for me to get more comfortable with this deck. Oh, this card. I've had some really good, interesting, powerful experiences with this deck so far. But definitely need to work with it more, want to work with it more. And because I really enjoyed this deck so much, I also picked up the Oracle deck in a trade. So obviously I done a very quick draw with this deck, and that's all so far. And I want to work with them individually, these two decks, but I also want to work with them together and just kind of see how they play along. You know, maybe establish whether I do prefer them together or whether I prefer them separately. So I just have a lot of learning to do, and I think growing to do with these decks, which are really interesting and exciting for me, because they are really out of my box. I really do tend to prefer quite scenic imagery, and these are just not that at all. They're illustrative and very, very beautiful, but they're not scenic at all. But they are very interesting. So these two I have started working with, but definitely a lot more room for me to you know, continue working with, continue getting to know. Next we have the Numinous Tarot. This one has kind of surprised me quite a bit. I've shuffled it, but I don't think I've done, maybe I did like 2 or 3 draws, and that's, like, I love this backing. This deck I had been following on Eclectic Tarot Forum when it was still being created, and then, which was years ago, and then it got put on the Kickstarter like a year ago. I don't know, it feels like a while ago, and I backed it immediately because I'd been waiting for it for so long and I was so excited. And then as it was shipping out, was kind of like in the middle of this transition I've been having away from more cartoony imagery, or away from imagery that is a little bit fantasy. Not entirely, but I kind of feel like maybe this deck is fitting into that category a little bit, and that's perhaps why I haven't reached for it, which has really surprised me, because when I was watching this deck be created, when I backed it, I was so thrilled. I just thought this is 100% a deck for me, and I genuinely believe that if I had have gotten it a year or two ago, this would be like a all-rounder deck that I was using all the time. But it's not, and it kind of really makes me sad. And I mean, there's certainly people were arguing that this is a modern deck, a contemporary deck. And I think that comes from the fact that there is some diversity in this deck, which doesn't exist in older decks so much. And there are elements of it being a little bit more modern, but for the most part, for me, I think that this is still very much like there's an element of fantasy and not realness to this deck. It doesn't feel like the world that I live in. You know, there's kind of like a Japanese-esque style artwork influence. You know, it's very colorful, and there's a lot of like, you know, like this with like little, are these like, yeah, like little fireflies and stuff. Like I know like you know what I mean? Like it doesn't feel, you know, like I could pop into a coffee shop and see, you know, this person, or there is an element of fantasy to it that I've shifted from, but I'm not willing to just like give up on this deck before I've even tried. So as much as I haven't been drawn to using it, this is one of those decks that I need to like actively kind of work against that. Like just, you know, sometimes there are those times where we just want to go to the decks that we're drawn to and, you know, just kind of let it be free and easy and work with what calls to us. But sometimes I feel like we kind of need to actively work with decks, and this is one of those decks for me. And then another deck that is one of those ones that I thought I was going to love, I want to love, but I just haven't been drawn to using, is the Mesquite Tarot. This one I actually got quite a while ago, so this is not a new deck like most of the others that I've mentioned are. I got this about a year ago, and I fell in love with the imagery almost immediately, and I love the book. I do use the book, but for some reason this deck just does not talk to me. And at this point, the reason I really want to focus on using this is to just work out whether this is a deck for me or not. Because basically, I've been holding on to it because I love the colors, I love how it looks, and because I love the idea of it. I really do. And because I love the book. But I don't use it. I'm not drawn to use it. As much as I love the look of it, I just never feel called to use it. And the few times where I've kind of gone to use it, I pulled a card or two and just nothing comes through. So I really want to dedicate some time this year, kind of force myself. I know that sounds horrible, but that's what I feel like I need to do. Just kind of force myself to spend some time with this deck and see if we do, or if we can get along. And if not, I just need to accept that this isn't a deck for me and let it go. Like, it's just kind of one of those decks that it's been on my shelf for long enough now. I need to make that decision. Or at least make a decision whether, you know, this is a deck that I want to, maybe I need to spend more time with it and it's a bit of a slow burn. I'm not sure. I just don't feel like I've given this deck enough of a chance yet, and I want to do that more intentionally. Another deck that is not new to me at all is the Whispering Tarot. Now this is a deck that when I first got it, I couldn't put it down. I fell in love with it. I adored it. But this very much falls into the category of cartoon fantasy style decks. And I love this backing. It's kind of like a mini size deck. It is a limited edition. I think it's out of print now, although I'm not 100% sure. This is again kind of like the Mesquite Tarot. I love it. I love the look of it. I love everything about it. But since this shift has been kind of happening, and even before then, I don't think I've read with this deck in about 18 months, which is just crazy to me. It makes me a bit sad, but it just is the reality. So I need to kind of really actively work with this one again. These are kind of in order at the moment, actually, sort of. Really need to actively put some time towards this deck and make some decisions about its place in my collection and my life, I suppose. So I think it's interesting that quite a few of these decks that I've mentioned, the first lot of decks that I mentioned, I love this color. Ah, so cute. Oh, I love it. I love the fantasy element of it. I think it's so whimsical and playful. But anyway, the first lot of decks that I share with you are new decks that I'm looking forward to playing around with, and that are new to me, and I'm just excited to get to know. Whereas the last couple here are more decks that are hanging around, that I want to love, that I thought I would love, that I'm just not connecting with, and I'm not sure if they belong in my collection, and I need to work with them to establish whether they are or not. And so this deck very much falls into that category. So those are the decks that I really want to focus on using for the rest of the year. I have a couple of other decks coming in, so obviously they'll go into the mix as well, and I'm sure other decks will come in and out as they always do for me. But these are just decks that I really want to focus on and intentionally work with, whether that's just to get to know them because they're new, or work out if they are for me if they're older. So this has been really good for me to kind of set out a clear intention of what decks I'm going to focus on using, and hopefully this will hold me accountable a little bit. Like, I mean, there's definitely like that line between, you know, really kind of being disciplined and making yourself do something that you might not necessarily want to do. But also I'm aware that this is tarot and some things you just can't force. But I think especially with those last decks, if I literally cannot work with them, perhaps that's a sign in and of itself, but I want to give them a go. But I would love to hear from you what decks you're really going to focus on using in this last kind of quarter and a bit of the year that we have left. Are there any decks that have been kind of hanging around on your shelf, you know, maybe that you got earlier on in the year that you haven't quite dedicated time to? Or are they decks that have just kind of come in and you're really excited to get to know? Any of those decks that you just really want to set the intention and focus on for the rest of this year, I would love to hear, either in the comments below or as a video response, whatever is easiest or whatever you want to do. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you again soon. So much love. Bye.